James Robert Thompson stood like a statue outside the grand gates of Buckingham Palace. His red coat was perfectly pressed, and his black bearskin hat sat exactly straight on his head. For 3 long years he had been doing this same job every single day. His boots were so shiny they looked like black mirrors. His white gloves were spotless, and his rifle was held at the perfect angle. Every morning James woke up at 5 o'clock in his small apartment near the palace. He would make himself a simple breakfast of toast and tea. Then he would put on his uniform piece by piece. First, the red tunic with its bright golden buttons, then the black trousers with the red stripe down the side. Next came the white belt that crossed his chest. Finally, he would place the heavy bearskin hat on his head. The walk to the palace took him exactly 12 minutes. James knew this because he had walked the same path over 1,000 times. He would arrive at his post at exactly 7:30 in the morning. His job was simple but not easy. Stand perfectly still. Look straight ahead. Never move. Never speak. Never react to anything that happened around him. But James had a secret that nobody knew about. Before he put on his uniform each morning, he would do something special. He would hum quietly to himself while he polished his boots. His voice was so beautiful, it could make angels weep. The melodies that came from his throat were pure magic. They were gentle like summer rain and powerful like ocean waves. Music had always been James' biggest love. When he was a little boy, his grandmother would sing him to sleep with old Irish songs. She had the most beautiful voice in their small village. She taught James every song she knew. She told him that he had a gift from heaven itself. His voice was something special that should be shared with the world. James had dreamed of becoming a famous singer. He had practiced for hours every day. He knew hundreds of songs by heart. He could sing opera and folk songs and modern music. His voice could be soft as a whisper or strong as thunder. But life had other plans for him. When James turned 18, his father became very sick. The family needed money for medicine and doctors. James had to find work quickly. The Royal Guard paid good money and gave him a steady job. He thought it would only be for a year or two. Then he could go back to his music dreams. But 3 years had passed and James was still standing at his post. Every day hundreds of tourists walked by him. They took pictures of him. They tried to make him laugh or smile or move. Children would make funny faces at him. Adults would tell jokes right next to his ear. Some people were kind and respectful. Others were rude and mean. James had learned to ignore everything. He trained his mind to go to other places while his body stood perfectly still. Sometimes he would imagine himself on a big stage singing for thousands of people. Other times he would remember his grandmother and the songs she taught him. The music in his head helped him get through the long days. Nobody who walked past James could guess his secret. They saw only a silent guard in a funny hat. They thought he was just a decoration like a statue or a picture. They did not know that inside his chest lived the most beautiful voice in all of London. They did not know that this quiet man could sing songs that would make them cry tears of joy. The other guards respected James because he never broke. He never smiled or laughed when tourists tried to be funny. He never got angry when people were rude. He was the perfect soldier, but none of them knew about the music that lived inside him either. As James stood at his post that Tuesday morning, he had no idea that his life was about to change forever. Tuesday afternoon was busier than usual at Buckingham Palace. Tour buses kept arriving and dropping off excited visitors from all over the world. Families with children walked around taking pictures. Older people sat on benches and watched the guards. The sun was shining bright, and everyone seemed happy to be there. James stood at his usual post near the main gate. He had been there since 7:30 in the morning, and it was now past 2 o'clock. His feet were getting tired, but he did not move a single muscle. His eyes looked straight ahead at the street. He watched cars and buses pass by, but his face showed no expression at all. Around 2:15, a group of young men walked up to the palace gates. There were 5 of them, and they looked like university students. They were all around 20 years old and wore casual clothes. One of them had messy brown hair and was taller than the others. Another one wore a red jacket and kept laughing loudly at everything. The third one had glasses and carried a backpack full of books. These students had been drinking beer at a pub near the palace. They were not drunk, but they felt brave and silly. They started looking at James and pointing at him. The tall one with messy hair was the leader of the group. His name was Mark, and he always tried to show off in front of his friends. Mark walked closer to James and stared right at his face. James did not look back at him or move at all. Mark thought this was funny, so he started making jokes about the guard. He told his friends that James looked like a toy soldier. He said the big black hat made him look silly. The other students laughed and encouraged Mark to do more. The student in the red jacket joined in with the teasing. He said that James' job was the most boring job in the world. He wondered how anyone could stand still for so many hours without going crazy. The one with glasses said that guards like James were just for show and did not do any real work. They were just decorations to make tourists happy. More people started gathering around to watch what was happening. Some families with children stopped to see what was going on. A few older tourists looked uncomfortable but did not say anything. Others thought it was entertaining and pulled out their phones to record videos. Mark got more excited when he saw the crowd growing. He loved being the center of attention. He started walking around James in circles while making comments about his uniform. He said the red coat looked like something from a costume party. He joked that the white belt was too tight and probably hurt. He pretended to march like a soldier, but did it in a silly way that made people laugh. The student in the red jacket decided to try something different. He stood right next to James and started making funny faces. He stuck out his tongue and crossed his eyes. He made weird noises and tried to get James to look at him. When that did not work, he started jumping up and down like a child having a tantrum. James felt his jaw muscles tighten, but he kept his face completely still. Inside his mind, he was getting angry, but he had trained himself to control his emotions. He remembered his training and his duty to stay professional, no matter what happened. He thought about his grandmother and the songs she taught him. The music in his head helped him stay calm. The crowd was getting bigger and the students were getting bolder. They could see that James would not react to anything they did. This made them want to try harder to get some kind of response from him. They did not realize that they were about to push too far and change everything. Mark was enjoying all the attention he was getting from the growing crowd. More and more people had stopped to watch what was happening at the palace gates. Some were taking pictures and others were recording videos with their phones. Mark felt like he was putting on a show, and everyone was his audience. The crowd now had about 30 people in it. There were families with young children who looked confused about what was happening. Some teenagers thought it was funny and were laughing along with the university students. A few older people looked worried and uncomfortable, but they did not want to cause trouble by speaking up. Mark pulled his phone out of his pocket and held it up high. He started recording a video while talking loudly so everyone could hear him. He said he was going to make this boring guard famous on the internet. He told his phone camera that he had found the most lifeless person in all of London. He said this guard was probably too stupid to do anything except stand still and look pretty. His friends cheered him on and started making even crueler comments. The one in the red jacket said that James probably could not even speak properly. He joked that maybe the guard had forgotten how to talk because he never used his voice. The student with glasses said that James was like a robot that someone had dressed up in a fancy costume. An elderly woman in a blue coat tried to stop what was happening. She walked up to Mark and told him that he was being very rude and should leave the guard alone. She said that this young man was just doing his job and deserved respect. Mark looked at her and laughed. He told her to mind her own business and go find something else to worry about. The old woman looked sad and angry, but she did not know what else to do. She stepped back into the crowd, but kept watching with a worried expression on her face. A few other people nodded at her and seemed to agree that this had gone too far. But nobody else was brave enough to speak up and stop what was happening. Mark was getting more excited as his video kept recording. He wanted to do something that would get millions of views on social media. He wanted people all over the world to see his video and think he was funny and clever. He started thinking about what would be the most embarrassing thing he could make the guard do. Then Mark got an idea that made him smile in a mean way. He looked right at James and spoke very loudly so his phone would pick up every word. He said that this guard probably could not do anything useful at all. He bet that James could not even sing a simple song without sounding terrible. He challenged James to prove that he was more than just a decoration. Mark told the crowd that it would be hilarious to hear this grown man in a funny hat try to make music. He said it would probably sound like a dying cat or a broken radio. His friends laughed and started chanting for the guard to sing. Soon other people in the crowd joined in with the chanting. The pressure was building and James could feel it pressing down on him like a heavy weight. Sweat started to form under his thick uniform, even though the day was not very hot. His heart began beating faster, but he kept his breathing steady and controlled. James had faced many challenges during his 3 years as a guard, but nothing like this. People had tried to make him laugh before, and some had been rude to him. But nobody had ever attacked him so personally or tried to humiliate him in front of so many people. The cruel words were hitting him deeper than he expected, and something inside him was starting to change. The chanting grew louder and more demanding. People in the crowd were now shouting for James to sing while Mark kept his phone camera pointed directly at the guard's face. The sound echoed off the palace walls and seemed to fill the entire area around the gates. James could hear individual voices calling out cruel suggestions about what song he should attempt to sing. More people had joined the crowd, and it was now close to 50 people strong. Tourists who had been walking by stopped to see what all the noise was about. Some joined in with the mocking, while others just watched with curious expressions. A group of teenagers started taking selfies with James in the background, while he stood completely still. Mark was loving every second of this attention. He walked around James in a circle while still recording his video. He made comments about how the guard was probably too scared to even try singing. He said that James knew he would sound terrible, so he was just going to stand there like a coward. His friends laughed and agreed with everything he said. The student in the red jacket started clapping his hands slowly and loudly. He was trying to get the whole crowd to clap along with him. Soon many people were clapping and stomping their feet while chanting for James to sing. The noise was getting so loud that other guards down the street could probably hear it. James felt sweat gathering under his heavy bearskin hat. The thick wool uniform that he wore every day suddenly felt much heavier than usual. His breathing stayed controlled, but inside his chest, his heart was beating like a drum. He had never experienced anything like this level of pressure and humiliation during his 3 years of service. An older man in a gray suit tried to help James by telling the crowd to stop what they were doing. He said that everyone should respect the guard and let him do his job in peace. But Mark turned on him immediately and told him to go away. Mark said that nobody had asked for his opinion, and he should mind his own business, just like the elderly woman before him. The man in the gray suit looked frustrated, but he did not want to cause a bigger scene. He shook his head and walked away while muttering under his breath about young people having no respect these days. This made Mark feel even more powerful because he had scared away another adult who tried to stop him. James was fighting a battle inside his own mind. Part of him wanted to stay professional and follow his training no matter what happened. He had been taught to never break character and never react to anything that tourists or visitors might do. His job was to be a silent guardian, and that was exactly what he should remain. But another part of James was getting angry and hurt by the cruel treatment he was receiving. These people were not just trying to make him laugh or smile like most tourists did. They were trying to destroy his dignity and make him look like a fool in front of dozens of strangers. They were attacking him as a person and not just as a guard. Deep inside his chest, James could feel something stirring that he had kept hidden for 3 long years. The music that lived in his heart was starting to wake up and demand to be heard. His grandmother's voice seemed to whisper in his ear, telling him that his gift was meant to be shared with the world. The moment of decision was coming closer, and James knew that his life was about to change forever. The noise around James had reached a level that felt almost unbearable. The crowd was now chanting his challenge in unison, like they were at a football match. Their voices mixed together into one loud demand that seemed to shake the very ground beneath his feet. Mark had moved closer and was now filming just inches from James' face, while continuing to make cruel comments. James looked straight ahead, but he could see everything happening around him. Phone cameras were pointed at him from every direction. Children were staring at him with wide eyes, not understanding why the adults were being so mean. Some people in the crowd looked uncomfortable, but they were too afraid to speak up against the mob mentality that had taken over. The student with glasses had started a slow clap that was getting faster and faster. Other people joined in until the sound became like thunder rolling across the palace courtyard. The rhythm seemed to match the beating of James' heart as he struggled to decide what to do next. His training told him to stay silent, but his soul was crying out to be heard. Mark leaned in even closer to James and spoke directly into his phone camera. He said that this pathetic guard was obviously too weak and stupid to accept his challenge. He told his future viewers that this was proof that royal guards were just useless decorations who could not do anything real or meaningful. His words cut into James like sharp knives. Something inside James began to crack like ice breaking on a frozen lake. All the years of standing silent while people made fun of him started to weigh heavily on his heart. All the dreams he had given up to help his sick father came flooding back into his memory. All the songs his grandmother had taught him began to sing softly in his mind. James thought about his commanding officer who was nowhere to be seen. He thought about the rules he had followed perfectly for 3 years without a single mistake. He thought about his career and his steady paycheck and his reputation as the perfect guard. All of these things seemed less important now than they had just minutes before. The crowd was getting restless, and some people were starting to lose interest. Mark realized he needed to do something dramatic to keep their attention and make his video go viral. He decided to make one final cruel comment that would either break James completely or force him to react in some way. Mark looked directly into James' eyes and said that he was probably the most boring and talentless person who had ever lived. He said that James was wasting oxygen just by standing there and taking up space. He told the crowd that this guard represented everything that was wrong with people who had no personality or skills or dreams. That was the moment when something deep inside James finally snapped. Not with anger or violence, but with a sudden, overwhelming need to show these people who he really was. The music that had been sleeping in his chest for 3 years suddenly woke up and demanded to be released into the world. James made a decision that would change everything. Without moving his head or shifting his position or changing his military posture in any way, he took a deep breath that seemed to come from the very bottom of his soul. The air filled his lungs completely, and he felt power flowing through his entire body. The crowd was still making noise, but James no longer heard them. His mind went to a quiet place where only music existed. He thought about his grandmother sitting by his bedside when he was small. He remembered her gentle voice, singing ancient Irish songs that had been passed down through generations of their family. James opened his mouth and let the first note escape from somewhere deep inside his heart. The first note that came from James' throat was so pure and beautiful that it seemed to stop time itself. The sound cut through all the noise, and chanting like a sword made of silver light. Every person in the crowd felt something magical touch their heart in that single moment. The cruel laughter died instantly and was replaced by complete and total silence. James began to sing an old Irish ballad that his grandmother had taught him when he was just 7 years old. The song was about a young man who left his home to seek his fortune in a faraway land. It told of love and loss and the pain of being separated from everything that mattered most. His voice carried every emotion in the song as if he had lived through the story himself. The melody flowed from James like water from a pure mountain spring. Each note was perfect and filled with so much feeling that people in the crowd began to feel tears forming in their eyes. His voice was not just beautiful, it was something divine that seemed to come from heaven itself. Nobody had expected anything like this to come from the silent guard they had been mocking. Mark stood frozen with his phone still recording, but his cruel smile had completely disappeared. His mouth was hanging open, and his eyes were wide with shock and amazement. He could not believe that the man he had been insulting possessed such an incredible gift. The other university students looked ashamed and embarrassed about what they had been doing just moments before. An elderly woman near the front of the crowd put her hand over her heart as James' voice soared through the most beautiful part of the song. Tears were streaming down her cheeks, and she seemed to be remembering something precious from her own past. A young father lifted his small daughter onto his shoulders, so she could see the guard who was making such heavenly music. The song told of a mother waiting by her window for her son to return home from his long journey. James' voice became soft and gentle when he sang about her love and hope. Then his voice grew strong and powerful when he sang about the young man's determination to make his family proud. Every word was clear, and every note was sung with perfect emotion. People in the crowd began to sway gently as the melody washed over them like warm summer rain. Strangers who had never met before found themselves standing closer together as they shared this magical moment. The barriers between different languages and cultures seemed to disappear because music spoke to everyone's heart in the same way. A businessman in an expensive suit took off his hat out of respect for what he was hearing. Two teenage girls who had been taking selfies put their phones away and just listened with wonder on their faces. An old man with a walking stick closed his eyes and let the music transport him to memories of his own youth and the songs his own mother used to sing. James continued singing without moving any other part of his body. He stood in perfect military position with his rifle at exactly the right angle and his face looking straight ahead. Only his voice moved, and it filled the entire area around the palace gates with beauty that nobody there would ever forget. The song reached its most emotional moment when James sang about the young man finally returning home to find that his mother had never stopped believing he would come back. His voice carried all the joy and relief and love that reunion would bring. Several people in the crowd were now openly crying as they felt the power of that moment. When James finished the last note, the silence that followed was deeper and more complete than anything anyone had ever experienced. It was as if the whole world had stopped breathing to honor what they had just witnessed. The silence after James finished singing lasted for almost 30 seconds. Nobody wanted to break the spell that his voice had cast over everyone. Then slowly one person began to clap. Then another joined in. Within moments, the entire crowd was applauding with tears still fresh on many faces. The applause was not loud or excited, but gentle and respectful, like people were clapping in a church. Mark looked down at his phone and realized he had captured the entire performance on video. His hands were shaking slightly as he watched the recording back. He could see his own shocked expression reflected in his phone screen. The cruel comments he had planned to make for his social media post now seemed impossible to say. Something had changed inside him during those few minutes of James singing. Within an hour of the performance ending, Mark had posted the video on his social media accounts. But instead of the mocking caption he had originally planned, he wrote something completely different. He said that he had witnessed something truly amazing, and that everyone needed to see this incredible guard who had the voice of an angel. He admitted that he felt ashamed of how he had treated James before hearing him sing. The video began spreading across the internet faster than anyone could have imagined. People who saw it immediately shared it with their friends and family. Comments started appearing from all over the world praising James' beautiful voice and his grace under pressure. Many people said they had been moved to tears just by watching the video on their phones. Mark's friends also posted their own versions of the video from different angles. Each one showed James standing perfectly still in his red uniform, while his magnificent voice filled the air around the palace. The combination of his military discipline and his incredible talent created something that people found both moving and inspiring. News websites began picking up the story within hours. Headlines appeared saying things like "Amazing Royal Guard shocks crowd with beautiful voice" and "Palace Guard's secret talent goes viral." Television news programs started showing clips of the video during their evening broadcasts. Radio stations played audio recordings of James singing and asked listeners to call in with their reactions. Social media platforms were flooded with shares and comments about the singing guard. People from countries around the world were writing messages of praise and admiration. Many said that James had restored their faith in the power of music to bring people together. Others said his performance had made them cry tears of joy during difficult times in their own lives. Music industry professionals began reaching out to try to identify the mysterious guard. Record label executives were calling the palace trying to get contact information for James. Talent agents were offering to represent him if he ever decided to pursue a music career. Concert promoters were already imagining the crowds he could draw if he ever performed on stage. The original video that Mark posted received over 1 million views in its first day online. By the end of the week, it had been watched more than 10 million times and had been shared to every major social media platform. Translation services were adding subtitles in dozens of languages so people around the world could understand the story behind the performance. James had no idea that his moment of decision to sing had been captured and shared with millions of people. He had returned to his normal duties after the crowd dispersed and was standing at his post the next morning just like always. But tourists were arriving specifically hoping to see the famous singing guard. The palace grounds were busier than they had been in years. Other royal guards began noticing that more people were gathering around James' position than anywhere else. Visitors were taking pictures and asking questions about whether he might sing again. Tour guides were adding stops at James' post to their regular routes and telling people about the viral video that had made him famous overnight. The palace administration started receiving phone calls from news reporters wanting to interview James. Television producers were requesting permission to film special segments about the guard with the golden voice. Publishers were offering book deals to tell his story. The quiet man who had spent 3 years in anonymous service had become one of the most famous people in London without even knowing it. On Friday morning, exactly 1 week after his performance, James received an unusual message. Instead of reporting to his normal post, he was told to report to his commanding officer's office at 10 o'clock. James felt nervous as he walked through the corridors of the palace administrative building. He was sure he was going to be disciplined for breaking protocol by singing while on duty. Colonel Williams was a stern man with gray hair and many years of military service. James had only spoken to him a few times during his 3 years as a guard. He knocked on the office door and entered when he heard the colonel call for him to come in. James stood at attention and waited to hear what his punishment would be. But Colonel Williams surprised James by smiling and asking him to sit down in a comfortable chair across from his desk. The colonel explained that he had seen the video of James singing and that it had received millions of views around the world. He said that the royal family themselves had watched it and were impressed by both James' talent and his professional behavior during a difficult situation. The colonel told James that his phone had been ringing constantly with calls from music industry people wanting to contact him. Record companies were offering large amounts of money for James to sign contracts with them. Television shows wanted him to appear as a guest. Concert venues were inviting him to perform for audiences of thousands of people. James could hardly believe what he was hearing. The secret dream he had carried in his heart for so many years was suddenly becoming possible in ways he had never imagined. The colonel handed him a stack of business cards and contact information from people who wanted to work with him. The offers were more generous than James had ever dreamed possible. But James felt confused and overwhelmed by all the attention. He told Colonel Williams that he loved his job as a royal guard and did not want to abandon his duty. He said that he had made a commitment to serve, and he wanted to honor that commitment. He was not sure if he was ready to give up the security of his steady job for the uncertainty of a music career. Colonel Williams smiled and told James that he would not have to choose between his military service and his music. The royal family had discussed his situation and decided to offer him a special arrangement. He could keep his commission as a royal guard and perform his duties when he was not touring or recording music. This would allow him to pursue his dreams while still serving his country. The colonel also told James that the university students who had originally mocked him had come to the palace to apologize in person. Mark and his friends had felt terrible about their behavior after seeing how their cruelty had affected James. They wanted to make things right and had created their own video apologizing publicly for what they had done. James asked to see the apology video, and the colonel played it on his computer. Mark looked directly into the camera and said that he was deeply ashamed of how he had treated James. He said that James had shown incredible grace and dignity in responding to their meanness with beauty instead of anger. He urged people to treat others with respect and kindness instead of cruelty. The video of the students apologizing had also gone viral and received millions of views. People were praising Mark for having the courage to admit his mistakes and apologize publicly. Many comments said that both James and Mark had shown important lessons about how to handle difficult situations with class and maturity. Colonel Williams handed James a contract from a major record label that wanted to produce his first album. The advance payment they were offering was more money than James had ever seen in his life. They wanted him to record the Irish ballad that had made him famous along with other songs that showed off his incredible vocal range and emotional depth. James looked at all the papers and business cards spread across the colonel's desk. His life had changed completely in just 1 week. The quiet guard who had stood silently at his post was now being offered opportunities that most singers spent their entire careers hoping to achieve. He realized that his grandmother had been right when she told him that his voice was a gift meant to be shared with the world. As James walked back to his quarters that afternoon, he felt like he was floating on air. The dreams he had put aside to help his family were suddenly within reach again. But more importantly, he had learned that sometimes the worst moments in life can lead to the most wonderful opportunities if we have the courage to be true to ourselves. 3 months later, James stood on a stage that was very different from his usual post outside Buckingham Palace. The Royal Albert Hall was filled with 2,000 people who had come to hear him perform at a special charity concert. The red velvet seats stretched up to the beautiful domed ceiling, and every single one was occupied. James wore an elegant black suit instead of his Red Guard uniform, but he still carried himself with the same dignity and posture. The audience included members of the royal family who sat in the special royal box overlooking the stage. They had specifically requested that James perform at this benefit concert to raise money for military families in need. James felt honored to use his newfound fame to help other people who served their country just like he did. Behind James on the stage was a full orchestra ready to accompany him as he performed. The conductor was a famous musician who had worked with the greatest singers in the world, but he had told reporters that James had one of the most naturally beautiful voices he had ever heard. The musicians were excited to be part of this special performance. James looked out at the audience and saw faces from all walks of life. There were wealthy people in expensive clothes sitting next to working families who had saved money to buy tickets. There were young children who had seen his video online and elderly people who remembered the old songs he loved to sing. Everyone was united by their excitement to hear the guard who had become famous for his incredible voice. In the front row, James could see Mark and his university friends who had traveled from their school to attend the concert. They looked proud and happy to be there supporting the man they had once treated so cruelly. Mark had become one of James' biggest supporters and often shared updates about his career with his social media followers. The concert began with James singing the same Irish ballad that had made him famous. But this time, instead of standing perfectly still like a guard, he was able to move freely and express the emotion of the song with his whole body. His voice filled the massive hall and reached every person in the audience with the same power and beauty that had stopped the crowd at the palace. When James finished the song, the applause was thunderous and lasted for several minutes. People were standing and cheering, and many had tears in their eyes, just like that first day when they heard him sing. He performed several more songs, including some that he had written himself about his experiences as a guard and his journey to becoming a performer. James' debut album had already reached #1 on the music charts in 12 different countries. The title song was the Irish ballad that started everything, but the album also included original compositions that showed his range as both a singer and a songwriter. Music critics were calling it one of the most impressive debut albums they had ever heard. But success had not changed James as a person. He still reported for duty as a Royal Guard when he was not touring or recording. He still stood at his post with the same dedication and professionalism he had always shown. The only difference was that now tourists recognized him and treated him with the respect and admiration he had always deserved. James had also used his success to help his family. His father's medical bills were completely paid off and his parents were able to move to a nicer home. James had set up a scholarship fund at his old school to help other young people pursue their dreams in music. He often visited schools to perform for children and encourage them to develop their own talents. The cruel joke that was meant to humiliate James had instead revealed a gift that brought joy to millions of people around the world. He had learned that sometimes our greatest challenges can become our greatest opportunities if we have the courage to show the world who we really are inside. His grandmother's words about his voice being a gift from heaven had proven to be true in ways neither of them could have imagined. As James took his final bow at the Royal Albert Hall that night, he felt grateful for every step of his journey. The 3 years of silent service had taught him discipline and strength. The moment of cruel mockery had given him the push he needed to share his gift. And now he was living a life that combined his duty to serve others with his passion for music in perfect harmony.